Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to another episode of Voices for Excellence. I am your host, Dr. Michael Connor, CEO and founder of the Agile Evolutionary Group and proud host of VFE. And today's guest is all the way out in Southern California. We had a finder all the way on the West Coast, one of the most recognized superintendents in California and nationally. A dear friend of mine. We were actually talking about the dissertation process, which I so envy because you know what, Lori, I did it once and I would love to do it again, just for the pure fact of just researching some of the most important issues in education. And of course, your dissertation and your research is going to be a huge slither in identifying and targeting those strategies to eradicate the equity, excellence problems we see in education. But it is great to have Miss and future Dr. Lori Gonzalez out of the Lamont Elementary School District in Lamont, California, Superintendent of Schools. Lori, how are you? How's everything? You're surviving the dissertation process?
I am. Hi, Dr. Connor. I am doing fantastic. Lamont Elementary School District is an amazing district, and we're in the Central Valley, 2 hours south of LA. So, north of LA. So actually not quite Southern California, but I get the vibe. So we're good.
Well, listen, my apologies, because you know why, Lori? California is just beautiful to me everywhere. So Southern, Northern, Central, listen, I want to be out there. I'm tired. Right now, it is 29 degrees and there's snow. Yeah. So a contrast from where you're at in Central California, but glad to have you here. Amazing just to now pick your brain, unwrap your brain, specifically around your leadership, the impactful leadership with regards to what you're doing in Lamont and the other things that you're engaging in within education. So looking forward to this episode today.
Me too. And I appreciate your ask about my dissertation. I am definitely in the thick of it. I am super excited. And I agree with you that this has been a remarkable time. I'm with USC and I've learned so much with the research. And just to, give you a synopsis, it is focused on Latina superintendents. Guess why? But, on culturally responsive school leadership, which is something that's very dear to my heart, and what that truly entails as a superintendent. Califia is the person that has really brought that framework to life, but I've put a little bit of spin on it. Not many people know about the CRSL framework, but yet we embody much of that framework within its quadrants. And so that's what I'm bringing to light with my dissertation. And I'm hoping, that I can see what it brings out in the future. I'm excited about doing this work, but it's a lot of work, and being a superintendent. But I will say that it has been a great time in my career, and, just being able to meet people like yourself and, call you my friend and colleague is so important. And I think that that's the biggest part about running any district, right? As a superintendent, is opening yourself up and being vulnerable, and getting that just that knowledge base from others, because why repeat things that have not been successful? Better to open up and learn and grow and try new things.
Absolutely.
I'm excited for the conversation.
Absolutely, Lori. And can't wait for your publication of your dissertation, because we know your research is going to be a very impactful thread within the education ecosystem. And just to contextualize what you stated, the importance of the network effect and being able to have, I like to say, national networks and people that you can lean on and depend on for strategies, ideas. And during those times, of course, when you're a superintendent, where you can be able to support each other. So just fascinated by your work and can't wait to really start unpacking, the core themes around culturally responsive practices and your research and what you're finding, which is real-time research, right? Real-time evidence that you are collecting from the field. But this first question, Lori, is such a fun question. Really gets to It really has my listeners and my viewers understand who Miss Future Dr. Lori Gonzalez is as a superintendent and an education practitioner in the field. But you are admired by many education stakeholders in California and nationally because of your intentional leadership as a superintendent, underscoring those key elements of culturally responsive practices. So for my listeners who do not know Miss Future, well, keep on saying that, Dr. Lori Gonzalez in the education ecosystem, what song describes your leadership signature and equity stands for all?
Oh, wow. That's interesting. Okay. I had to sit back on that one a little bit. Let me see.
That's a BFP first. We have our guest sitting back on it. Yes.
Yeah, let me see. You say I can come up with some songs. Let me see. There's one song that it's really been resonating with me. It's interesting because you say equity. I was brought up in a very humble home, first generation, Latina, parents immigrate. Well, I was born in Mexico, so I myself immigrated here. Right. And so my parents were strict with me, but in a way to protect me. And so I've always been someone, when it comes to equity, is that my job is to open doors for those, and then to help our families understand that, there is a fear that it's okay to be, fearful of certain things, but don't let fear drive you, right? And so for me, equity really encompasses that. And so I would say there's two songs that come to mind. And the first one is, you probably know Luis Fonsi from Despacito, but not Despacito. That's not equity, but but he's got a song called Abrazar la Vida, and I love it. It says embrace life. And to me, that's equity. When you embrace life and you teach others to embrace life, doors open, experiences open. And then there's this opportunity for more. And so, he says, there's a line in the song that says, my life is in blank and open to learning. That's equity. When you're able to just say, regardless of what you come with, regardless of what you don't come with, I'm going to provide and give to you. So that's one song that kind of comes to mind. The other one is Try Everything by Shakira. I'm on the Latina thing yesterday. But, why not Shakira, right? But Try Everything. She's got that song from, that really it is Try Everything. And for me, that's equity, because we cannot be afraid of our own limitations when it comes to teaching our students and giving our students what they need to be successful. And I think that a lot of time we're afraid to do things, right? So, and that's an inequity, because we're afraid of computers, or because we're afraid of technology, or now case we're afraid of AI, that we're not going to try it. No, you got to try everything. And that way it becomes an equitable opportunity for all students to, to learn from. If I'm someone that's afraid to do things, then my students will not have that experience. Then when they go out into the world, they're less than. They have less than the others that weren't afraid of that. So I think those are the two songs that really kind of come into my mind right now. The other one would be a poem, and it's just because it resonates so much with me, which is Tupac's, Rose from Concrete, the rose growing from concrete, because, and I know there's been songs and mixes, made on that poem, but it's because of that. Like, if we nurture someone to that point that they can grow regardless of the circumstances, wow. And so again, equitable. So for me, equity means giving to what our students need, to be successful, regardless of what our circumstances are, and we're going to fight for that equity sense. So that would be my definition. Embrace life, try everything, and water that rose, because it's going to grow regardless of where it's growing from.
Amazing answer. I love the two songs and a poem, right? That's another first for Voices for Excellence, but I really loved how you were cross-correlating, right? The songs and key tenets from each song to really develop this holistic definition of what equity is and can be within our schools. But I loved how you say embrace life, right? And we have to be able to create opportunities for our students to be able to embrace life. And we can't be afraid to attempt new practices, new solutions, new approaches to integrate, let's say, AI or new methods of instruction that is undergirded with this lens of being culturally responsive and culturally relevant, since we know that by 2030, 2025, 56% of public education will be Black or brown within the United States. But that rose from the concrete, right? And when we close our eyes, who is that, or who are the roses that are rising from the concrete is the 56% that represent public education, our Black and brown students, where we have to be able to dismantle inequities. Love how you say it. Open doors. I don't even want to mention the name because I know I can't pronounce it, so I'm gonna leave that alone. But yes, open doors and don't let fear drive you. We see a lot of now, and I don't want to characterize this as the totality of education, right, Lori? But we're seeing elements where leadership are afraid to take those next steps because of governance structures and boards of education, communities, and their response to whether it be social emotional learning, cognitive ability, mental health, which has now been polarized and politicized in the education ecosystem. And when we talk about the E word, which is the new curse word now for education, equity, why, right? So, and we're now seeing leaders that are, fearful of taking those next steps because of the potentiality of losing their job or being in hot water. But again, don't let fear drive you, because this is who we do it for. We do it for our students.
Absolutely. And I say that all the time. Fear is what drove me for many, many years. I mean, I sit here as a Latina superintendent, and how few are there of us, in this country. That's part of my, that's my dissertation, is focusing on Latina superintendents. And there are so few. There's so few, yet 75% of the teaching workforce are women.
Yeah.
But from my research, only 2% are Latina superintendents. Wow. I mean, talk about an imbalance there, right? Yeah. But I only got here because people believed in me. So I had allyship, I had mentorship, I had networking, people that believed in me more than I believed in myself, because I was allowing fear to stop me. And then once I got in and I realized the potential that could be done with, with my thought process, with me as a superintendent, to move that needle for students, because I want students that look like me, that lived like me or live like I did, grew up in those same circumstances, have these opportunities, and so that there can't be only 2% in 2020, 2030. Like there can't be in 2040 only 2% Latina superintendents. It's got to be a lot more.
That's egregious.
Yeah, and so for me, fear is what stopped me. And until I got here, did I realize you're allowing fear to stop you, and that is what is also stopping others. And so I finally kind of just woke up one day. I don't even know how it happened, because if you knew me way back when, I was a shy little girl that would never do anything without getting permission first, without making sure that no one was going to. I still do that, but I do it in a very different manner. And so now I just don't let fear stop me. I just don't. I still have fear in things, but I don't not do things because of fear. And going to your point about equity and how difficult it is to be a superintendent. It is difficult, but my job has never changed. I got here as a teacher, and I'm still a teacher. My classroom is now my board. My classroom are now my leadership team, right? And so when I meet with them and when I have conversations with them, it is on these hot topics. It is on these, because in the end, we serve one person, and that's our children.
Yeah,
We serve
Absolutely.
our children. And so it is about their future, not ours. On my over my shoulder here, I have the top 10 skills of 2025. When you look at those top 10, skills of 2025, I have it there to remind me every day that what we do is not about us and what we need right now. It's what they need going forward. And if we're not pushing that needle over and providing them what they need, then we are failing, right? And what if we're doing it out of fear? I'm using AI right now, to look at the coding, and I was scared. I was like, oh my gosh, how do I do this, right? But you can't not do it because you're afraid to. Back in the day, well, I didn't, I'm not going to use the typewriter because I can't get my fingers to do that. I'm afraid. Well, look where we're at now. So, things evolve and you've got to evolve with them. And so, there's a lot to be said about equity, and there's a lot to be said that, we cannot continue to live in the same world that we grew up in and have those inequities that we lived through. It's not fair to our children. I said this the other day. We're in year 23 of the 21st century.
Correct.
And yet we're still dealing with some of the things that I did, back when I was in school. And that's not okay. We see some of the things, just in the home level that our children are still facing that I did when I was at home. And like, okay, what are we doing wrong? What is it that we need to fix to be able to move it forward? Because ultimately our children are going to be taking care of us, and we need to be able to do that. So yeah, there's a lot to be said, that you cannot allow fear to drive you, for sure.
Absolutely. And I think, Laura, we have to, specifically in the education space, we have to continue to intentionally interrogate equity when it comes to gender equity, right? Specifically in the executive leadership role, 2%. Wow. When you hear of that number, and you said it in 2023, we really have to rethink hiring practices, rethink the ecosystem where that disproportionate rate where 70% of our teachers that are women that are in the classroom and only 2% have actually moved through that trajectory to the executive leadership role. Not even looking at it from a statistician or a psychometrician lens, that's a problem. That's a huge problem. And I've been saying this nationally, and it's quite controversial when I say it. I'm like, we need to stop hiring men. I'm discriminating against men because we need to actually have those proportionate rates with regards to executive leaders that represent women, that represent Black and brown women, that represent women in totality. So we keep pushing that needle, especially with your research that is about to be published in May, hopefully defending in March, as you stated. And we keep pushing the needle on that because that's one of the areas that I really think we need to really start focusing on in education holistically, even within the economic demand with multiple other industries. But getting into the second question, right, Lori, is there's this continuous discussion around transformation and reauthoring structures and systems that parallel readiness for Generation Z, Generation Alpha. You kind of alluded to an implicit example around the utilization of artificial intelligence, right? We know Gen Z, Gen Alpha, they're students that have essentially emergent technologies at their hand every single minute of the day, with the exception sometimes when they go into their classrooms, right? Mm-hmm. That's where we actually see the disjunction and the divide with AI into education versus when Gen Z, Gen Alpha, they're living their natural life in their natural environment with AI and emerging technologies around them all the time. But painstakingly, and I want to use that word deliberately, there isn't a defined blueprint for innovation and excellence, right? Mm-hmm. Which I think that we see this in industrial model all the time, kind of replication and incremental improvements within the actual industrial model. But from this level of experimentation, right, cause and effect within the traditional realms of education, we see that there are stakeholders, leaders resisting AI when now we have to naturally kind of have this synergistic approach of just the implementation continue, right? But it's we need it. It's necessary. It's not something that we want. It's something that we need now, specifically for the students that we're educating. How do we shift mindsets, Lori? How do we shift mindsets to the new best of class, where education culture, won't continuously resist the inevitable, which is innovation, creativity, and now adding those elements of AI.
Yeah. Interesting that you use the word culture. That is their culture.
Yeah.
So when I say culturally responsive school leadership, culture is the students' culture, right? And right now, technology, AI is part of their culture. Just recently, I had my first of the year Superintendent's Student Advisory Council, and I had AI on the agenda. I wanted to know what the kids, what are their thoughts? Because student voice is the most important part, right? When you sit in this chair, it's like, if they're the number one person who I serve, I need to hear from them, and they know about it. They've heard about it. We're a rural school district, so there are people that think, oh, you're in a rural school district in the Central Valley. Kids don't know. Yes, they do. They're very well aware of what's out there, and I think you cannot be innovative and say you're an innovative district if you're not encompassing what's new and out there and prevalent. And so, one of the things that we've done in under my superintendency, or where I'm very, very, very proud of, is we have a brand new framework for the future. I got to Lamont, and, we had a mission, a vision, and goals that, really weren't 21st century. And I kept telling our board, like, I need goals to be able to move forward. And so we went through a very strategic format with a guiding coalition made up of teachers, classified staff, students, parents, leadership, all of us put together, board members involved as well. And we came up with a new vision, a new mission, and new values, all of them centered around innovation, equity, community, and integrity. And then we ended up with a learner profile. And our learner profile is to be an empathetic collaborator, an innovative problem solver, a resilient learner, a responsive community member, and an effective communicator. Mm-hmm. All of that is based on giving personalized, authentic, equitable, and inclusive and competency-based instruction, all of which are innovative practices will include what's new. These new, as AI is one. I think where the failure comes in is if we don't give the right direction on how to implement it and show our teachers, give that professional learning of how to use it and how to implement it. We've had conversations here. I have had conversations here with my leadership staff. And then, gaining from what I got from my students, there's concern. Like, some think it's, as you said earlier, like teachers don't know how, so they think it's cheating. Others think it's, it's something that could be, utilized and implemented. I would be failing my staff if I don't start providing professional learning on it. I truly believe that anything that's out there that's innovative and is new is going to be scary, but it's how do you use it? And if you use it for the right purposes, will it be something that's beneficial? And so, I've got, some amazing colleagues that are out there, amazing colleagues that are doing some amazing things that are very much innovative practices. And so I'm leaning on them, asking, how did you, open up this conversation with your teachers? How are you doing this? And so that's where I'm, trying, that's my professional learning to be able to put it out there. But then I'm also someone that's going to dig in, and I'm going to listen, and I'm going to, take, conference sessions and whatnot. I was just at a conference with my board members, and Khan was the, Khan Academy, was, the featured speaker, and he talked about how Khan Academy is going artificial intelligence and what it's doing. And my board sat there going, they were just like, wow. And so we had great conversations, and those are the best moments right there. Absolutely. Going back to your previous, comment, and you use that time to have those conversations because they're the ones that, represent their constituents and are going to be asked those questions. So you you're helping them understand, then you can come back here and do the work, within the district. But I mean, to your point, you cannot call yourself innovative and use old practices.
Correct.
You cannot say you're implementing the top 10 skills for 2025 within your structures and your systems in your schools if you're not going to open your doors, to these new and innovative practices. So I think your systems and your structures need to incorporate innovation, but truly understand what innovation means. Ground yourself. For me, it's really been grounding ourselves on our learner profile, but then also, on my framework for the future, which has 4 pillars, of how we're going to get there, and so we're delving in now as a leadership team is like, how are we going to get to this? What are we going to do? And it's really focusing on the learner. So the whole learner, you talked about social emotional, that is just as important as the basics of reading, the basics of math, the basics of writing, which will all come into play, if you have those right systems and structures. But you got to focus on the whole learner.
Absolutely. And Lori, well stated, right? A lot. I like to use the podcast as a mechanism or a platform for asynchronous professional learning, as you were just talking about, being able to have that level of direct instruction, but controlling the learning in that asynchronous manner. Really, really, and to my audience, really loved how Lori unwrapped I got this explicit and implicit visualization of a vision of how to lead your stakeholder group, your leadership team, your governance, your board of education structure, and including your students to one desired outcome, one desired vision. When you talk about mission, vision, and goals aligned to the innovation and to the 21st century demands. Wow. And unwrapping that in this professional learning context for each of those stakeholder groups that represent the education ecosystem. But I want to have you go just a little bit further, right? Because I think that this is one of the common misnomers, Lori, that we see in education is we have a multitude of definitions of innovation, right? And I feel that when I hear different variations and definitions of innovation, specifically in education, I get that feeling from about 5 to about 7 years ago when rigor became the academic, I like to say, fad, or the jargon or fat of the word rigor. You had about 50 different definitions of rigor where we couldn't reach to one confined definition for universal coherence, right? So if you could, for my audience and listeners on VFV, can you provide what Lamont is using as a definition for innovation, specifically embedded within the work of your business model and instructional framework?
I don't know if it's going to come out as a complete sentence, but for us, it's really envisioning a brighter future for our students, where their learning is infused with cultural relevance,
absolutely,
innovative, and there's the word, up to date and important technologies,
absolutely,
and learning, just foundational learning. Perfect. That all enhances their opportunities going forward, and they are able to come out as these learners that are problem solving, resilient, and effective communicators who are going to be contributing to their community in a multifaceted way. And so for me, innovation truly means the opportunity to provide the students what they need, the whole learner. So that also means social emotional. So I would say innovation for me is it's a complete package for and by each student.
Absolutely. And thank you Thank you. Thank you for including that element or that tenet of culturally responsive practices, culturally responsive pedagogy, culturally responsive systems that are integrated with innovation. It has to.
It has
I
to.
always like to say that reciprocity between innovation and being culturally responsive is that third pillar that you identify within this triangulation, learner experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
Addressing all elements of the whole child. Well stated. Well stated, Dr. Gonzalez.
Well, you have to. You have to because, you can't sit here and say we're going to promote, and increase, the inequities of, and I spoke specifically about Latina superintendents, but let's just say in general, Black and Brown students achieving and in any, realm of profession, right? And yet not accept who they are. Because culturally, you still have to accept it, and you have to not just accept it, but you have to continue it to grow it. I want my children to be proud of who they are. I'm proud of who I am, and so that's being culturally responsive. But also culturally responsive means being compassionate, empathetic, to their needs, and so that is huge. That's a huge component of it. And so that to me is empathetic. That is innovative, because when we go into this world that they're going to go into, as they move into this world, they need to be able to pick up on that we need to be able to live together in harmony and live together as an acceptance and live together and not sit behind a computer all day long and think that that's life. It's not. We still need to engage and interact. Well, the only way we can do that is if we're culturally responsive to each other's needs, to each other.
Yep.
And then accepting and highlighting. Like, to me, I started a mariachi group. We started a folkloric dancing. We have a huge Mixteco families here. And so we want to start looking at adding something for the Mixteco families. We're just at the same conference, and Fresno Unified, my friend Bob, they hired their Hmong, that is being culturally responsive, where you're still accepting who they are, but moving toward these new innovative practices. So absolutely, it's very important to me. Huge.
A model to follow, Lori. And to my listeners and to my audience that is out there, please, at the end, we'll get Dr. Lori Gonzalez, and we'll call you that. I'm going to just call you that for the rest of the episode, because you know what? You're getting it. Once you defend Lori, and once they say you pass with no modifications, or I was the one that had to pass with minor modifications, but minor really mean big changes to it. So don't listen. When they say minor modifications, it's really bigger changes to the dissertation. So, but once you defend Lori, you are a doctor. That's
okay.
it.
All right. So I'll call you May 9th and say, done.
That's done.
Actually in March.
In March, you are done. You're going to be a doctor. But Lori, when you to my audience, I was about to say, please, at the end, we will get Lori's information, email, contact. Please reach out to her, because that definition of being culture responsive, there are a lot of misnomers out there that think culture responsive practices are instructional strategies or tactical methods of pedagogy, but in reality, and being empathetic, understanding your students, compassion, recognizing their backgrounds, their cultural backgrounds that they're bringing into our classrooms, and finding innovative ways to integrate that into our everyday practices. But Lori, we're going to make a shift, right? We're going to talk about governance, Board of Education, right? Ooh. And when we talk about collective governance capacity, as you stated that you and your board have went to a conference together, Khan was presenting the new elements of AI within his product. But now when we talk about collective governance capacity, whether it be 5, 7, or 9, rooted in innovation, excellence, and equity is essential more than ever. Elevating the capacity of your board members, just like you were doing around what that definition of equity is, presenting and introducing them to different AI methodologies and emerging technologies that can be able to advance and accelerate learning. But when we talk about building governance and board capital with integrating AI for equity, and organizational reimagination purposes, how do leaders put a direct emphasis with equalizing AI innovation for equity-driven environments where now boards are not resisting the new learning, but they're embracing the new learning to support the superintendent and his or her leadership teams in order to continue this process of reaching all in the AC stage of education?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and it's something I'm actually we're dealing with right now specifically. May not seem like something as, let's just say, as advanced, I want to say, or as quote unquote out there, as AI. But I'm going to talk about our speech and language pathologists that are online. Being in front of a Zoom, as we sit here, right, has really changed in the last several years since COVID, right?
Absolutely.
And it has gotten really good components to it, some really bad components to it, and then it's evolved, right? So you've got that trajectory that's taken place. Well, with the use of Zoom, so many things took place that people didn't feel were good. They were innovative, they were different, they were new, but they didn't like them, and they want to go back and revert back to the old style.
Right.
But circumstances within just education of itself have not allowed for things to take place. So in this case, I'm going to talk about speech and language pathologists. This is a national crisis. There are not enough speech and language pathologists. There are not enough institutions that actually provide, that as a major. And then those that do have a limited number of students that are able to get in because of the amount of work that it takes for the professor to oversee it. So it has created a national shortage. So here's Lamont, and Lamont's not the only district in the nation that is dealing with this, but we don't have enough speech and language pathologists, humans on campus, right? We don't have enough humans on campus. So we've had to go to this new innovative approach, not AI, but we are using AI, just so you know, for something else. But, it's having that speech and language person on Zoom. And a lot of people have a really hard time with it. My board had a really hard time with it. And so it required a lot of governance training, showing them what it looks like, opening our doors to parents that have concerns about it. There are still many that are very upset about it. And there are boardrooms that are full of angry people that their children are getting their speech through this process. It's still a human, but it's through Zoom. But my point to that is we have to be open to new practices to be able to deliver the services that are required. I'm not going to not give the services that are part of this IEP, right? Because I don't have a person that I can hire here. There aren't enough. And so through these national crisis situations, things come up, right? Things are evolved. Things are developed. AI is one. We're using a program where students are able to get reading intervention through an AI program that listens to students read, and then it gives them feedback.
Amazing.
My board's only open to it because we piloted it, and they saw what that did. And so it goes to show that as a superintendent, I have to teach. I have to work with my board of governance. I have to work with my leadership team to show them, demonstrate, provide opportunity to view it, provide opportunity to work with it. And then when they see that there's the positive that comes from it, then we move on, and then implement it. And so, to answer your question, it really is, it's driven by need, right? And if the need is there, why would you not? And it is us who have to adjust ourselves to be able to allow for these new technologies, these new innovative practices to come in and to be part of our systems and structures. Now, I don't want to ever get to the point, and I'm a very techie person, and I'm very much into innovation, but I never want to get to the point where we don't have a human being in front of our children. I really do believe that we will all ultimately need that. But I've also visited other industries, and I see how much technologies take over certain capacities within a system and a sector, but they still need that human, right? They still need it, but that human knows how to use it. And so it is our job to be able to provide that and afford that. And so we cannot do without, just because, it's not what we're used to, or because it doesn't look like what we need it to look like. So I use that as an example only because it's a real true one that I'm dealing with right now. I've got some people that are really upset, that we're using, this online system, and that's just like a sliver of what, AI would do, right? But it's allowed me to learn how to navigate those waters for my governance team, for my administrative team, for my educator team, for my staff, my classified staff team, for my parents, and even for my students. Having that conversation with them, I asked, one of the questions I asked is like, what do you like it? And I had some say, no, I don't like it because, I don't like the way it writes for you. Well, it doesn't sound like me. Good. The fact that you can recognize that means that you're not going to use it for that reason, right? And then when you have that occasional teacher that will say, well, I don't want to use it because the kids will cheat. Well, that's why you create impromptu writing prompts. And if you say, okay, write, and if the kids can't write like what they've been turning in, obviously they're using it in the wrong way. And so it's building capacity. It's really building capacity. That's my job. And so, I think that that's very important. And to your point, that regardless of what that innovative practices, you have to build that capacity and teach and be willing to open doors to it.
Really, really like your answer, Lori, because, one thing that I have been saying both nationally and internationally, just referencing back to my notes from your answer, is this reverting back to the old, right? And I've been challenging leaders across the country, in the Middle East as well, UAE, is that when you hear somebody or you actually see a practice of going back to the old, we have to be bold enough to challenge those stakeholders, those practitioners, to not go back to the old, because we know the old did not work, and it exacerbated many gaps that we are seeing now that are compounded in education. But specifically, I loved how you defined the differences between pedagogy and andragogy, right? Andragogy, adult learning, being intentional. You even stated it, that your part of your job is to build capacity, right? And that is exactly what andragogy is. And the new practices, I had a great conversation. I was just at a DALI event I was keynoting, and Dr. Baron Davis and we were talking, and we were actually talking about how we can be able to use AI, that we can focus on. We're shifting teachers or shifting practitioners, where now we're putting our best practitioners where our students who most need it have a practitioner every day. This is to defy the teacher shortage, and then be able to use AI in a synchronous, asynchronous manner, where students could be able to use that on an independent manner, where now we have this level of equity where our students who most need the practitioners in front of them are there, have those teachers, but also providing equity to the students, where we're using AI as a tool to be able to deliver instruction as well. It was a inverse strategy of trying to be able to defy or really eliminate the teacher shortage. or the teacher shortage that we're dealing with in education. But again, you will hear parents, right, who will go back and say, "You're not putting my kid on an AI, all this time." But when in reality, it's not going to be a substantial amount of time. It's how are we able to provide our students who most need that practitioner in front of them to be able to provide that access to them in an equitable manner. Really like how you stated that, but I want to reference a quote from one of my professors at Harvard, Kareem Lakhani, and you stated it before we get to the next question. And the quote was, AI won't replace humans, but AI with humans will replace humans without AI.
Oh, that's a good one. Oh, I like that. Yeah, I really like that. And I have to go back for a second because you said something that really made me think here. So, you said revert back to the old, right? I think the old never goes away. Education, right. Unfortunately, yes, you've got some structures about education that should have gone a long time ago, and we're still dealing with them, right? We all know we can go back in history and talk about all of that. But the reality is that there are parts of education that won't go away, and that they are part of this, the systems and structures, but they're meant to be there for a reason because that is part of education. Now, enhancing your instruction with AI or enhancing your instruction with innovative practices is what's important. Reverting back is one thing. Moving forward and improving, that's equity. To me, that's equity because you're providing, what's needed. And hey, how many times I remember as a first year teacher thinking, what? I have to teach cardinal directions? I don't know what's left. I don't know what's east, west, north, and south. Can you imagine now you just pull up your phone, you put your compass on, and you know which way you're going, right?
Right.
That's enhancing yourself, with what you're doing. So education can definitely be enhanced. And there's something to be said about reverting back, but, because it is about enhancing, but also allowing our teachers and educators to provide what's best and most needed for students. That's the best part about it because teaching is hard.
Yes, it is.
And no one taught us how to teach reading. And
right.
Yet you come here and what's the biggest area of need? Reading.
Absolutely.
And so if we can find something that's going to help and provide that, why not? So yeah, I love that. And it's definitely a lot about, working together collaboratively with your staff and with everyone in between to move forward.
Yeah. Now getting into instruction, because I want to highlight your instructional expertise, right? Mm-hmm. And I've been hearing this across the country, even, when Xandra Jo Galvin and I were doing the CALSA Academy for Leadership and Innovation. And one of the consistent problems of practice, right, that we're talking on that I hear is around EL learners and the science of reading. Right. And I wanted to get your take on this because we know that there are a number of debates regarding the science of reading, right? National recommendations where we're shifting the model, moving from this balanced literacy approach to now the structured literacy approach in education. But again, universally, the education leaders and practitioners in California have always stated that there's this issue with the science of reading and EL learners, right? The elements of even implementing the science of reading in dual language programs. Just from your perspective, right? How are you addressing these issues? Are you seeing these issues? And what could be some next steps for support in order to leverage equity if we're talking about EL learners or multi-language learners or multi-linguistic learners, I should say, and dual language programs?
Oh, I love that you asked this question. Okay, so many people don't realize this. So I have a master's in reading and a reading specialist credential. So I got to administration in a very roundabout way. I didn't do the admin credential. I actually passed the test. And so reading is my jam, as they say.
Absolutely.
I love the instruction of reading. And I also taught pre-whole language and then whole language, and I was a bilingual teacher. So I have a lot here to say. So watch out. Here goes.
Please.
So the science of reading. Okay. There are elements of the science of reading that I appreciate. I think it's very important that our teachers, anyone that teaches reading, which is all teachers at all grade levels,
Absolutely.
need to understand. They need to understand that there is a process of teaching things. They need to know the difference between phonics and phonemic awareness. They need to understand how to approach the instruction of reading. What I don't appreciate is the rudimentary format, and that they feel that it needs to be done. To me, it's not structure. It's rudimentary. It's too explicit, and the reason why is because it is not. If, in my opinion, it's not. It does not work with EL learners. It does not work with students that are struggling in reading, and it does not also work with students that are multilingual, that are in your dual program, because we do not follow that same format. And so you cannot say you're a science of reading and only follow that format and then try to implement it with your English learners, because they're not going to learn that way. And it's definitely not going to learn in your dual language, because it depends on the language that they're learning. Right. And so for me, balance is definitely the way to go. You have to have a little bit of all, right? And quite honestly, that's innovation. You have a little bit of everything to be able to make a program. And so, one of the things that we're really working on is guided reading, going back to those basics of guided reading, sitting together with our students and working with them on the elements of reading, but based on their needs, not based on a structured format. Here's day 1, 2, or 3. The other component to that is with our dual learners, their reading instruction looks very different than our non-dual in classrooms. And so a lot of it has to do with how you structure your dual classrooms. And I, we're at that point right now that we really needed to ground ourselves, right, with our enabling conditions, which were our mission, vision, and values. And then we had to ground ourselves on what is the learner outcomes that we want. And now we're looking at those conditions of what is it how we're going to teach it. If we're saying we're going to be personalized, if we're saying we're going to be authentic, innovative, and equitable, and competency-based, what does that look like? So we're starting to work on that. We're going to start providing, basic how do you teach reading, how do you teach writing, but do it in such a way that is not day-to-day scope and sequenced out. It's based on the needs of the student, and it's ever evolving. To me, that's where it really needs to go to. And you'll pull some of the elements. Like I said, I appreciate some of the elements of science of reading, because there are kids that are going to need certain, things. How do you teach them that? And then you learn it. So it's a good capacity builder for teachers.
Yeah.
And I will say, in my previous district, I did take my teaching staff through that process of how to teaching them what those fundamentals were, because my teachers outright told me, we don't know how to teach this. Our kids are so behind. How do you teach that? And then when you evaluated what they're getting at the universities, they didn't get that. So they didn't have those fundamentals that I did learn, getting my master's degree in reading. So, but not everyone's going to get a master's in reading, right? There's this new funding now for California to have reading specialists. Well, first you got to build them. You got to, build the capacity, because we don't have enough reading specialists, because, people just don't go into that realm. They're going to go into administration. They're going to go in this realm. So I just happen to go in that realm. And the reason why I chose to do that is because I wanted to become a better reading teacher. But it allowed me to learn the basics, which is what I call those structured basics of science of reading, but also taught me the appreciation of literature and the appreciation of narrative and the appreciation of, fiction and nonfiction, and then also of how to guide students to utilize what they've learned in their reading and in their writing. And to me, that's what's balance comes in. And so my goal is to take our staff in that direction to really understand how to do those basics, but then also with our learner profile, I'm going to build in opportunities for them to utilize reading, writing, and mathematics in these innovative, community-based, culturally based, opportunities that we're going to provide and experiences. So if it's learning from our community garden, they're talking about it, they're reading about it. I'll give you an example. They built the community garden. They put the flower beds in, and somebody made a comment that the kids put them in backwards. And my comment was, did you give them the instructions to read before? Because that's your reading right there. And they're like, no, we didn't. We were talking about it. I'm like, no, and so teaching our teachers when those opportunities come into play, right? AI. Okay, what, you're going to use AI? Well, let's read the directions first. How does it work? Instead of just digging in, right? So those are your opportunities to read and teach to read. So yeah, that's a great question. But I understand the why people go to the science of reading, and I think it's unfortunate. Our schools are full of students that can't read at grade level, right? But that's also based on an assessment. What about when they're out there? Can they read the signs? Can they put together a flower bed? Can they read and understand how to do that? Can they mathematically figure out that they need a 2x4 that is 3 feet long, not a 6 foot? Did they figure that out by reading? Were they able to speak about their book, with a green screen behind them and provide a book talk? That to me is real authentic reading, and authentic math experiences. So yeah, that's where I lie. So I ride that wave. I ride that wave, and it's kind of what their structure. To their structure to a system that can't always be structured. Because it's based on the needs of the students. So like I said earlier, I love systems and structures, but I also like to break them because it's based on the student need. And so in the end, that's what's going to guide you. And again, being open to the endless possibilities that are out there.
Yeah. And Lori, I tell you, breaking those historical legacy structures and systems, that's being intentional, bold, and unapologetic, the name of my book. But I find it so compelling, Lori, that universally I've been hearing that problem of practice, and knowing your background, knowing your instructional or pedagogical prowess, specifically around literacy. I really wanted to answer or ask this question for you to answer, because we do have a strong base that listens to or view Voices for Excellence, and really want these type of questions asked, right? And thank you for your perspective on that, because again, I think that this is going to be a continuous investigation, right? Continuous research, or be a great case study on what are going to be those adaptations, right? You already talked about extracting different elements of that science of reading theory and putting it into practice around multi-linguistic learners, dual language programs, EL students, all of that. So really going to be, it's definitely going to be a compelling investigation as we continue to unwrap this and see what the true impact around equity for all, right? Not just a level of implementation and ensuring that, these core programs or these core practices are being implemented to a level of fidelity and integrity, but also looking at it from what is going to be the influence and impact long-term with our students, with this radical change or shift that we're seeing in literacy instruction. But want to get back to what I stated at the outset, right? Where our student demographics in public education, 54% by 2025 will be Black and brown, right? So, with this grounded notion around equitable systems and solution,
Mhm.
specifically around EL students, multi-linguistic learners, and dual language programs, how do we ensure that they're protected, right? And what recommendations or what advice would you provide leaders with allocating for equity, since federal funding by ESSER is going to end at the conclusion of the 23-24 academic year? How do we ensure that these programs are protected?
Yeah. So one of my go-to comments is always, show me your checkbook and I'll tell you what, I'll tell you what you're spending, you'll tell me what you're spending on, right? And it'll tell me what you're doing. So
Yeah,
it's sort of the same thing, and with what you do here, it's by looking at your budget, it tells you where your priorities are,
mm-hmm.
and it and for me, students are first and foremost. And I say today's dollars are for today's kids. That's extremely important, and their needs. And so how are Black and brown kids going to be in the forefront? By student voice, and then interacting also with all your constituents. You have your educational partners, you have your teachers, your staff. Obviously, we have our families, our parents, and you have your community. But by always engaging them and knowing what their needs are. To me, the LCAP process is so incredibly important here, because it does, some people don't like the idea that, you're having these meetings and opening it up. I love it. Last year when I got here, I opened it up. Okay, tell me, what are the needs? What are your desires? What do you want for your children here? I came up with 18 overarching themes that, people kept, kind of did my own coding, right? And after everything that they said, I coded it and came up with 18 overarching themes. Well, when you look at those themes, it's all about student success. So you've got to look at how are you spending your money to ensure that the students are getting what they need. These ESSER monies, I got to Lamont, so a lot of them were already spent. My previous district, it depends on the kind of district you're at. Rural school districts, we're don't get the same funding like these urban districts, yet we have the same needs. Our kids have the same desires and wants as urban districts, but it's all based on per capita, right? How many students do you have? So the reality is that you have to spend them accordingly. When with ESSER money, you buy things that you have to sometimes put on the back burner.
Yeah.
You have your HVs, you have your plumbing, you have whatever else. A lot of the money, honestly, for me went with the filters system that we needed because of the COVID situation.
Yeah.
But then you do modernizations, with some of this money too that you want your kids to get, but you don't have the money freely to be able to spend it on these things. So like in my case, it's our libraries. Our libraries need updating. So that's one of the things that our kids ask. Can we have libraries that are more up to date with new material? Guess what's happening in Lamont? In Lamont, by this spring, we'll have all libraries will be updated, 21st century libraries and brand new books. Brand new books. That's innovation right there. When you bring new books to our kids, and when our kids say they want to read and they want books, hello, you go buy books.
Absolutely.
Of course, you buy books that written by Black and Hispanic authors, but also have Black and Hispanic, children, but also every other culture, because we need to live in harmony. And I keep saying that. Like, to me, that my hashtag is lead with heart.
Yep.
You cannot lead with heart if you only like a certain kind of people, or only like, want a certain kind of people to succeed. No, it's about everyone, and learning how to live in that environment when we all love each other. And have compassion and empathy for each other. And so listening to the needs is how I, guide myself. And that's also listening to the needs of my administrators. What do you need to help make you more successful with your team at your site? That's one of the things I tell my principals all the time. Go back to your sites. What are they telling you? What are teachers saying they need? And so they create proposals. And then we look at that, what are the things when we said that we want empathetic collaborators, and that was our first profile aspect that we're working on. And one of my principals came up to me and said, Ms. Gonzalez, my staff said if we want empathetic collaborators, then we need flexible seating. Okay. let's look at that. And so where does the money going to go to? Flexible seating. I can't say do this without that. And so,
Right.
you have to be able to do that. And I guess, to your point, any funding, regardless whether it's one time or it's a consistent, you go by what the law says. If it's for ELs, you use it on ELs. If it's, for homeless, you use it on homeless. If it's ESSER that's used, to do any, change and impact and improve things, and that's what you use it for. But you use it on the students and what they're asking for. And again, show me your checkbook and I'll tell you what you're spending your money on. I'll tell you what your priorities are. So you can look at my checkbook here, and, look at our budget here, and you're going to see that, if you spend between 70-80% on your staff and benefits, you're running a pretty solid organization. If you're spending a little bit more than that, you got to look at that, heavier on one side than the other, or too low on one side, right? And then you go from there, and you establish your budget. For us here too, we've got some old buildings that need work on. So modernization, we've been doing some modernization here.
Right.
One other thing here that was prevalent when I got here was safety. So we're enhancing our safety district-wide. So I would say to your question that student voice, educational partner voice has to be your guide in how you spend.
Well stated, right? Agency, right? Student voice is so critical now. And, when I look at the key characteristics and attributes of Generation Z, Generation Alpha, one of the common attribute for both of these two generations is that they want relevancy over compliance, right? Mm-hmm. And if you think about the original design of the education model, it is designed for compliance because there's a regurgitation of skills and information that translate into a summative assessment where, we get these rankings, right? Your school is great. Your school is not great based off of percentiles, but bringing that relevancy aspect of it is including the voice of the students and designing towards the voice of our most important customers, parents and students. You have articulated in this really meticulous manner the first element of design thinking, empathy, right? When you think about the business sector or any other industry thread, design thinking, understanding the need and the wants of the customer, the voice of the customer, that's empathy. We need to find creative and new ways to have this a sustainable practice in education, listening to the voice of our students and our families. But last question, Laura, you made it, man. I tell you, it's more of the
interview. You have to put yourself out there. I would say, Michael, you have to put yourself out there because as a superintendent, you can sit behind your door all day long.
Absolutely.
But you can't. So visiting schools, being out there for parents, creating opportunities. That's the other thing. Sometimes you just have to create the opportunities. My superintendent student advisory council is an opportunity. I have my coffee with a superintendent where I bring both families and community out. That's an opportunity. I'm on the Kiwanis. I'm on the, I'm on the chamber. I'm in the Lions Club. I do that because that's how you engage with the community. And again, I go back to my culturally responsive school leadership framework by Califia. It's the 4 quadrants, right? And one of the tenets is community. One of the tenets is also pedagogy. It's like, what are we teaching our teachers, right? But one of the tenets is community. And if you're engaging with your community, you really get to know their wants and desires. And so, to your point that, that's how you are become empathetic. You by being, understanding their wants, their needs, and their desires and their fears, right? Like,
absolutely.
Don't let fear, I said it myself, don't let fear stop you. But if you know what the fears are, then you attack those fears to stop it, so that they can freely feel like they can be part of it.
Excellent. Oh, I tell you, Lori, your answers are wanting me to jump back in the superintendency, but I'm going to say no right now. I'm having too much fun doing all of this work. I miss it dearly, but I think I'm having way too much fun doing all of this, being able to bring different content like this. professional learning content to leaders across the country. But last question, and I tell all my guests, right, take this question as is, because I try to limit all the participants and guests to about 3 words. It never happens. And when we talk about innovation, right, it's 3 and whatever it is. So I always tell every guest, or always say to every guest, take it as it is, right? But what 3 words do you want our listeners and viewers of VFE to leave our podcast with regarding a working definition of excellence for all? What 3 words will define this statement in their daily practices to transform organizational and classroom pedagogy for all? 3 words.
Whole learner focused, inclusive, culturally responsive.
Elaborate, please.
For culturally responsive?
All of them. I want my learners.
Okay.
All of them. I love. I know. I'm contradicting my own questions.
I love it. Okay, so whole learner.
Yes, I know I said 3 words, Lori, but so powerful. Whole learner focused, inclusive, and culturally responsive. Please, I just elaborate on each of those. Really.
Yeah. I had to really reach in there too. Like I was struggling here. Okay, so whole learner focus means you are really truly looking at the entire child, right? Everything from instruction, to mental health.
Yeah.
So your social emotional, you've got and medical, like, you're looking at every aspect of the child. So what do they need to grow academically, outcomes? What do they need to feel like that they are part of this system that we call our learning ecosystem, right? How do they feel safe and included in that? And then also, how do they feel healthy in that? So that's, to me, the whole learner focus. And that's one thing that in Lamont that I'm so incredibly proud to lead this district in that is that we provide all of that. And some of these things I inherited, and some of these things I've helped, and we've mushed it around and made it even stronger and better. And so to me, that's the whole learner focus. But I'm going to add a piece to it that I don't know if many people will add to it, but we've had a lot of money coming in from the California Community Schools, but it's our parents, right? Having our parents part of that, because to be a whole learner focused, you've also got to help our parents be stronger at leading their children at home, like helping their children at home, making them, even better, educated to know what's coming. And so that to me is a whole learner focus. It's like the student, the academic outcomes, like I said, mental health, healthy, just being healthy itself, and then parent learning. That's all of that inclusive together. Opportunities and inclusive. I mean, I'm going to take every kid. I don't care who you are, what you look like, what you have, what you don't have. If you are not inclusive, and if you are telling me that you can't, watch out, because I'm going to come after you, because I am all about every kid has that opportunity, because I was that kid one time where I was told no. I was that kid who had a gatekeeper that said why. And I'm sorry, that is not going to happen under my watch. You are going to open your door, and regardless of how hard it is to educate that child, you're going to do your darndest to do it. So to me, that's inclusivity, regardless of who you are, where you're at, or what you need. And then culturally responsive, because gosh darn, that's me. Culturally responsive means, that to me is where equity comes in.
Absolutely.
Compassion comes in. Empathy comes in. Personalization comes in.
Absolutely.
Being authentic comes in. Bringing in innovative practices comes in, but also still relishing in what those basics have, that are important to that person. So again, being responsive to the cultural needs of that child in every aspect. It's almost like the whole learner comes right back in, but it's their culture. It's who they are, their insides, It doesn't matter what they look like. Doesn't matter what black, brown, green, purple. It doesn't matter. It's
Right.
who are they that you're being responsive to. And to me, to be responsive really, truly means being empathetic, compassionate, personalized, equitable, and you're willing to break any barrier there is to
Absolutely.
make sure that you're being responsive to their needs. So those are my 3.
Absolutely. Whole learner focused, inclusive, and culturally responsive. Lori, this has been, or I should say, Dr. Gonzalez. Yes, we're going to listen. We're going to preach it. We're going to manifest it. So, this has been an absolutely extraordinary episode. And to my audience, my listeners and viewers out there, this is an episode that you should play probably 2 to 3 times to ensure you're doing a crosswalk alignment with your individual practices and the new concepts that Lori has presented today. Lori, if anybody wants to get in touch with you to talk about governance capacity, professional learning, science of reading, going deeper with regard to literacy pedagogy, programming, how would they be able to get in contact with you?
Yeah, well, I've got social media presence, although let me tell you, this dissertation has slowed me down a bit. I'm like behind a couple weeks. I'm not kidding. I'm not gonna lie. Like, it's been not been doing it as much as I had been, but it's just because I've been busy. But it's a good busy.
Yeah.
But my social media, I am at Lori Gonzalez, EDU. Is my Twitter handle. I'm also on LinkedIn. And then I do have both a Facebook and Instagram that are more of my professional. I keep my personal, but as a professional. But I would say both LinkedIn and Twitter are really where I post a lot. So you can definitely DM me that way. Obviously, you can find me on Lamont Elementary School District website, and my email's there. I'll reach back. I'm USC, so I'm definitely involved with the USC as much as I can. So if you see me at anything like that, I am so open to talk to anyone. I will tell you that I had beautiful mentors. I still have beautiful mentors. I mean, they're just beautiful people who believed in me. And going back to that 2% earlier, most of my mentors were male. Who believed in me, and I am where I am. And, I'm not discounting any one of them, and it's not about pushing anyone out so that you can get more of us. It's just opening doors.
Absolutely.
And it's one of the biggest things that we need to recognize, that it's about opening doors for each other. And so I am there for anyone that does or would like to have a conversation with me. I do love mentoring. I do love, that capacity of building others. And I hope I do more of that once I am done with this work here at USC, because I truly believe that, I have much to share because of both the wins and the losses, that have taken place. But they're good wins and losses because you learn from them and you grow from them. And, I don't know if you want to qualify them as wins and losses, but more like grows and woes, but anyhow, but those definitely there. And then you have my email, is an easy way, but follow me on social media, and I promise to get back up on it and get some more. I will definitely post you on there.
Yay.
In this podcast, because this has been fun. This has been amazing. I love your questions, and I love being challenged in my thought, and then to get clarity, because it just drives you a little bit even more.
Well, thank you for being on VFV this episode. I tell you, University of Southern California, one of the top education and research hubs, I like to say, in the country. Trojans, right? Yeah. And led by one of the most revered education researchers, anthropologists in the country, Dr. Pedro Noguera, and also your work that you're doing in Lamont. Thank you for trying to reach every single student. And to my audience out there, please reach out to her, to Lori, because When you hear her say, I want to reach every single student, she means that. It's not your company tagline, but it's really ingrained in her or embedded in her heart and embedded in her practices as well. So, Lori, thank you for being on VFB. Good luck to you next time I talk to you. Dr. Gonzalez.
Oh, thank you so much, Michael. This has been a pleasure. It's been so fun. I take this role so seriously because there are so few, right, superintendents in this nation, as you know. And it's a big task that we have ahead of us. It's, educating the babies of tomorrow. And there's a big world out there for each one of them. And so, yeah, thank you so much. This has been a pleasure. It's been so much fun, and fight on.
There you go. And on that note, onward and upward, everybody. Have a great evening.